You're listening to Masonry Principles, your guide to building better buildings, with hosts Amanda Badian and Phil Leden.
Welcome to Masonry Principles. We have 3 guests today, which is the most we've ever had on our podcast. And today we're going to be talking about something near and dear to our hearts, which is workforce development. And how do we get people, especially younger people, interested in the trades and specifically interested in the masonry trades. And today our 3 guests include 2 people from Michigan. So we have Scott Albaugh, who's the owner of Albaugh Masonry Stone and Tile, and Steve Wyckoff, who heads up the construction tech program at Clarkston High School in Michigan. And we also have from New York, Kyle Vimislik, who's located in Binghamton, New York. He is the masonry instructor and Broom Tioga in their BOCES program. And so we thought we'd start with Michigan, kind of what we're doing here, and then work our way into New York in open discussion for today's podcast episode. And so, Steve, I guess we'll start with you. I mean, do you mind giving us a little bit of a background on who you are, what you do with Clarkston, and the construction tech program there?
Our program started 5 years ago, and we started with carpentry. In the last few years, with the help of Scott Albaugh, we've been gearing up to include masonry. And this year, with Scott and the Masonry Institute of Michigan, we kind of got together and created some high school certifications, Cert 1, Cert 2, and Cert 3. And so we piloted Cert 1 on the last few weeks of school, and Scott can talk a little more about that. But I think it was a super activity, and the kids really enjoyed it.
And how many students do you have in your construction tech program, Steve?
We have 75 students, and next year we have 85 enrolled.
Awesome. Yeah, I was involved a little bit and I thought things went tremendously. And Scott, I mean, I wanted to bring you on just from a contractor's perspective. I mean, obviously, workforce is a huge need. How did you get involved with Clarkston? I mean, what's kind of your philosophy on encouraging trades, especially to younger people?
Well, Steve reached out to me after being referred by a general contractor friend, mutual friend of both of ours. And immediately, as soon as I got involved with Steve, you understood and was feeling the pressures of finding workforce for my own company of 100 plus employees, and realizing that if we don't get in front of kids and get them to at least take a look at the trades and the benefits and the skills required, we were failing ourselves. And we couldn't just, cry in our hands and say there's nobody out there, nobody wants to work anymore. I just didn't believe in that. And then when Steve got me involved, we took a very small portion of his shop and started to introduce guys to it. And Steve's a very collaborative person, and we really work well together to say, even if you're not going to do masonry, you've got to understand that masonry is part of the construction process, and electrical needs to go into it, plumbing needs to go through it, heating and cooling has to be mounted to it. It was my goal to just get kids to realize that masonry existed and try to get them to visibly see that it's an option.
Right. And so, I mean, in addition to masonry, Steve, I mean, what else do you teach at Clarkston Construction Tech? Or, I mean, what's your goal for a student graduating from your program? Where do you try to guide them?
Well, we have a 9 through 12 program, which is fantastic because you can have a kid for 4 years. You can get a lot of things done. We're big on certifications. We do OSHA 10, we do OSHA 30. Every student every year goes through respirator training, fall protection, scaffold safety. We're tied into the Carpenters Union, so they get their project book 1, 2, and 3 if they stick with the program. We would love to expand to welding and some rigging and a little sheet metal. And it's hard to do all this stuff at once, so we're just taking small bites at a time. And that's in addition to a few historical projects we work on off campus. So masonry is fitting right into this as we expand.
Okay. And I mean, what are these historical projects? I mean, you actually have your students working on actual jobs throughout the community?
Oh yeah, we've helped the local DPW out remodel their building. A historical house we're working on. It was built in the 1850s, and We've gutted it and now we're putting it back together. That's going to be a several year process. We have an old historical church that we're also working on that people probably either voted for or against Abraham Lincoln, that building. So, they get a real hands-on live experience.
Gotcha. Okay. And yeah, I guess we'll shift over to Kyle just briefly. Kyle, give you us a background of who you are, kind of what you do in the New York area.
Yeah, I was in the Bricklayers Local 3 for actually I still am today, but for 11 years I was actually on site working construction as a mason. And I've been at Broome, Tioga, BOCES, but I'm working on my 10th year now. Do you want me to tell you about our program as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have component districts where the students go to their traditional school and then they get bussed in. We have two groups. We have an AM group that I get for 2 hours and a PM group that I get for 2 hours.
And so, what kind of things do you cover in your programs?
Well, what I tell my students is that year one, so I have them for 2 years. So I break it down into 2 years. Year one, we mostly focus on brick and block. And in year two, we do everything else. So that's where we do our concrete, our stucco, our tile, our stone, cultured stone, manufactured stone. And we also try to get into, I always tell my students, in order to be a mason, you got to be some part of a carpenter. So we get into our hand tools, power tools, stuff like that as well.
What level of students are you typically working with, or what age levels?
I get juniors and seniors. So I have them for 1 year as their junior year, and then their senior year, I get them for their second year.
Okay. Yeah, that's a little bit different. I know, Steve, so you work with kind of all levels of students, correct? You work with freshmen all the way up through seniors?
Correct.
Okay. And I mean, as far as freshmen, I mean, are you finding they know and understand about the trades, or kind of what's their perception, thoughts? How do students find out about your program and what gets them excited about your program?
We host several activities at our building, and we'll literally go out in the hallways and pull the kids in. And word of mouth has really been our niche. But once a kid comes in, very few of them drop out because we're all hands on. There's not very many students out there who don't want to be moving around. Not very many of them enjoy just sitting in their seats. So when we get out and we're doing a little bit more than building bridges with toothpicks and popsicle sticks, class in the program really just sells itself. And then when they see that there's actually a career path at the end of the tunnel, the buy-in is very simple.
And after your kids graduate, I mean, are a lot of them going into careers, I guess, in the construction trades? Or, I mean, if you had to speak, I guess, in generalities, I mean, are a lot of them going in to be construction managers, or where are they kind of ending up?
Okay, we've had 3 graduating classes so far. I would say, just off the top of my head, we probably have a dozen kids who are going to either Northern Michigan, Ferris State, or Eastern Michigan pursuing a construction management degree. And I would probably say maybe 75% of the students who did not go to college are in the field. They're either union or non union people. They're just doing their thing. And I have kids who are 20 years old. They're coming back and they're saying, "Hey, Mr. Wyckoff, you were right. I do need that OSHA 30 certification. Do you still have access to it?" And boom, I can pull it right off the computer, print it up, and give it to them. So even if they don't get the bug right away, sometimes down the road, they come back and they're looking for a little help.
Great. And yeah, I mean, Kyle, in New York, is that similar to what you're seeing there? I mean, are a lot of your students pursuing careers in the trades after graduation, or, where are they kind of ending up?
I would say, to be honest, probably 20% end up out in the construction field. Some go to post-secondary education, some do military. Where we have the biggest problem is when they get out there to retain them in the construction field. That's where we have been working hard with the contractors and the unions to try to get them to acclimate better into that field and kind of stick with it a little bit more. But we get about that many. And generally I have about 30 students a year.
Oh, okay.
What do you think the disconnect is between classroom and job site once they graduate?
So that's a great question, and I try not to trash the next generation. I told Amanda before I hate the idea of the older generation saying that the newer generation is not any good. So I always try to reflect upon myself and my high school career from the transition to work. And I think sometimes they struggle with the new work ethic. So sometimes, I have them for 2 hours a day and they'll be an hour and 15 minutes and they'll tell you you're tired. And so you're like, okay, well, in this next phase of your career, this is going to be an 8 hour day. And I think just a little bit of a maturity level as they get a little bit older. And also, construction can be a kind of abrasive world out there. And I don't think they're quite ready for the shell shock initially. Usually, I'll tell you what, if they make it through the first year, there's a pretty good sign, like 90% chance they'll make it. That first year is where they just don't quite understand this new transition into adult work.
And did you both, Steve and Kyle, as instructors being instructors prior to COVID and after COVID, did you see a change in the students in that regard?
I'm really having a trouble with the last 2 years. And I know I can't quite put my finger on it. There has been a huge drop in attendance. And this isn't just with my class, this is all around our school altogether. When I talk with other teachers, attendance to get them back into the normal classroom 5 days a week has been a really difficult transition away from COVID. And also, it just wasn't quite the same. I'd like to argue that we got a little rougher around the edges population. They're kind of stepped up their game a little bit as far as that's concerned. And so I'm just kind of waiting for this little COVID blip to work its way through to see if that's just what the case is with that for me.
Absolutely. Steve, did you see any changes?
I would have to agree with Kyle. My juniors and seniors, their attendance was not as good as the freshmen and sophomores. I did not feel like I taught any differently after COVID than I did before. But I would also like to agree with Kyle that if the student can stick with a contractor for a year, he or she has a real good shot at sticking around in that field. But once again, going back to attendance, my seniors, it's like they spent a whole year of not having to be there. So it was like, what the heck? Why show up? Well, a lot of my seniors ended up getting worse grades than they're capable of getting. That's just part of it. There's a consequence for everything.
And with this type of work, like you talk to the contractors, number one is to be there on time every day. And it's hard, again, to get them to understand like that is vital. A death nail for a contractor is to miss work or to come late. And so you're just driving it into their heads for 2 years to make sure that they understand that part.
Yeah, and I guess I have a question. So, Scott, I mean, as a mason contractor and with all boss stone and masonry, stone and tile, I mean, we've talked. So Scott's on our board here at the MIM, and we've talked about trying to make masonry sexy, right? For lack of a better word. And how do we make the parents of students in high school be excited about and want their kids basically to pursue a career in the trades? And Scott, I mean, you've talked a lot about that. And I mean, how can we do better as trades so that we're not viewed as abrasive or, some of those type of terms rough around the edges? I mean, how can we do better?
Well, Phil, I think that's extremely important because as a father of 4 kids, I watched the influences in the education system that were, you know, most teachers wanted to push kids to college. And again, I'm very pro education. All 4 of my kids have graduated from college, and I do promote education. But at the same time, if it's not a good fit for a young kid who comes from a good family, I'll point at the mother, usually is the most vocal about not wanting their kids involved in a situation where they can pick up bad habits and or have a flawed vocation. And I think we can clean up our work sites. We can insist on zero tolerance, drug free workplaces, clean living, lead by example. I personally don't smoke or drink, and not that you can't do those things, but at the same time, I think you've got to really put something out there that parents can get behind and go, my young son or daughter is in an environment that we really like. The mentors are very supportive morally and ethically, and create a place that kids can thrive at, and then ultimately, set an anchor and build a career out of it. It needs to be as colorful and creative as some of the places that kids can work at if they do go to college. And we as contractors have to create an environment that's has some of those features. I mean, Kyle brought up a good point as far as the new ethic. They might want more personal time. So we've been trying to adjust that. That might be something. They want vacation time. They want to have time off. That's a new structure we have to work with, and we found that to be something we have to address. And if we don't address it, we're gonna, we aren't attractive in the competing world of vocation out there. It becomes hard for us to attract the young talent.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you touched on a couple of good things there. So I know, I mean, we had the roof replaced on my house 2 years ago, and I was talking to the owner of this roofing company about how they find roofers, and he said, well, we don't go to the church choirs to find roofers, right? And I think that's kind of just a flawed mentality, where he's telling me that, and I'm saying, well, why not? It's about creating that environment where anyone and everyone can kind of thrive. And I think the key to that is exactly what you touched on with mentorship. And so, I mean, after, let's say, a young person joins Alba, Masonry, Stone, and Tile, I mean, how do you work with your field staff to encourage kind of mentorship and development?
What we do, Phil, is number one, it feels like every employee wants some identity. We offer, shirts, and we obviously gave some to Steve's class at the time that we did the schooling too. They like swag, they like involvement, they like to have somebody they can talk to, which is, in our case, we have a human resource guy that takes, our human resource director really handles that real well. There's got to be some ability to communicate, to dump a young kid in amongst, we'll say, some seasoned tradesmen. The seasoned tradesmen need to be encouraged to, guys, you can't just throw everybody out. You got to give them a chance. Checking in with them. They need a little bit of coddling. And I don't love the idea that, you don't go to the church choir to get employees. That's assuming that you're going to go to the bottom of the barrel all the time. I mean, I think, we deserve the best. Our industry is good. The product is good. And we want masonry promoted as not a place for the failed efforts. This is all you can do. We don't agree with that. We think this is a viable trade with a lot of components. We need smart people. We need capable bodies, and that can be women and men. I mean, I really found in Steve's class, I'd really love to see more girls be involved. I mean, they were very attentive. The maturity level in high school is different. And I found that in the high school, the women were very much more attentive. And I don't know if it's just because of their maturity level. And I mean, I was in high school as a man and I was not very mature, but the girls that Steve had were very mature, and I would really like to see that promoted as well. I think we're shorting ourselves a little bit on that side of the workforce by not promoting to women too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, Steve first, and then we'll get to Kyle. But I mean, how are you promoting construction tech to everyone? I mean, not just specifically, one specific type of stereotype of what we'd picture in our head a construction worker being. At the school level, how are you promoting it across the board?
We do a couple things. We'll go down to the middle schools. We'll send a few instructors down there and a handful of students, upperclassmen, who know the middle school students, who are their brothers and sisters. And we'll take two or three lays with us, and we'll turn some pens and let the kids turn some pens. And the kids really do most of the recruiting for us. And obviously, our counselors, we have three counselors in our building, and they're always pushing the young ladies towards our program. As a matter of fact, we took some field trips to Paris State University and Northern Michigan University, and we took our counselors with us so they could see that there's a career in construction. There's a career there for everybody. You don't always have to be mixing the mud. You don't always have to be moving the scaffolding or doing the block and brickwork. You don't always have to be swinging the hammer or cutting the wood. There's things other than that that you can do and make a great career out of it.
Yeah, Kyle, I mean, how are you promoting that inclusivity?
So there's a lot there. The first thing is that most kids do not within my area do not know what masonry is. They don't know what it is. I've heard some of the funniest things ever, like what's mercenary, some great stuff before. What's happening is our guidance counselors at our local districts are the ones that tell them about my program. And I tell Amanda all the time, one of my favorite podcasts that you guys did was the North Carolina one. I love it so much. I listen to it all the time. I share it to everybody in the industry that I can find because they explain how the guidance counselors really have a different avenue for their career. Actually, everybody in education at the point took a different avenue. So they really don't see this as their path. So it really frustrates me sometimes that the guidance counselor is the one that's selling the masonry program. I want to be the one to go out and explain what the masonry program is. And what you were talking about with like technology and selling it, I love it when my students take Snapchat and are on the job site, former students are on the job sites taking pictures of stuff so that those younger kids can actually see it from their peers to know what it is. And also what you guys spoke about how we could change the industry and how it's viewed and stuff like that. I just came from the Skills USA competition again with North Carolina talking about them. You see it right there. They're all involved and the mentality is completely different. So you could see the pride that they have with what they do there. And there's an entire group and how they hold themselves and how they carry themselves. It's really impressive. And I don't know how to get that changing here so that we can have that different approach that they have there. To cover everything that you asked?
Yeah, I think that covered it. I mean, I think the biggest thing is we can't just sit around and complain about people not wanting to, be a mason contractor, bricklayer, whatever, without doing things proactively ourselves. I mean, COVID did change the world, really. And I mean, especially it changed our industry. And we work in an industry that historically has been terrible at change and not willing to adapt. And I think, I mean, we just need to do better, and I think we are doing better. I think, the programs we have at Clarkston and what you have going on in New York, Kyle, I mean, that's outstanding. And Scott, I mean, I think you hit on all the big points as far as culture. And I mean, how are we changing our expectations to want people to want to work here, So I think that all of this is great. Amanda, do you have any other questions?
I mean, not really a question, but more so a comment because, UMI spent in the last school year, we went to 10 different schools and spent a week at each of those schools doing hands on training. And I just learned a lot about the students. And going back to like my COVID question, what I took away from it is that these students think they have a choice to not attend school, and that's what really blew my mind. Like, I would see this there was a lot of students, like, I'd say 80% of the students, they came in every day with such a good attitude, and again, going back to what Kyle said, none of these kids, I think out of the 400 students we introduced to masonry, maybe 5 of them knew what masonry was or was familiar with the trade. So when we walked in with a whole hands-on approach, they really took a liking to it. But it is like trying to keep it relevant because at the end of the week, we do a presentation and we talk about the tradition of masonry and going as far back as the pyramids, the same fundamentals they were doing then, we're doing now. And I try to really bring it home by telling them, like, now that you've handled the material and you've dealt with the mortar and you know what a trowel is, you're going to go into your little towns and villages and cities and see what masons did in like the communities that they built. So there's like that sense of pride that I like to bring to the table. But keeping it relevant, I think, is like the biggest, it's almost discouraging because I don't know how we went from building cities, towns, and villages to having a limited piece of the market. That's where I kind of feel like, how can we be better? What can we do to be better? And like, there are some really great examples across the country where masonry is really strong, and how can we bring that to New York or Michigan? I just don't know what the formula is, but I think as long as we have advocates like ourselves in a group like this to spread the awareness and just promote the trade in itself. And I also like to touch on, you don't have to be in the field your whole entire career. This is a group of people that is a really good example. that you can become a teacher, you can get into becoming a business owner, you can, get into the office if you want to get into estimating. So that's where I feel like the conversations need to be had when you're talking with guidance counselors in schools. And I don't even know, like, it hits close. It's a topic that I care a lot about because I'm all about opportunity. And I love having conversations like this. And I'd like to hear how, like, moving forward, we can't just keep doing hands-on things hoping that they're going to take a liking to it. Is there anything else as a group that we could just chat about real quick, that some big ideas or out of the box thinking that someone's thought of but hasn't really done yet? Or what are you thinking?
I want to turn it over to Scott super quick on that because I mean, so we said kids don't really understand what masonry is, and I mean, I think the issues even beyond kids. When I started in my role here at the MIM, a year later, parts of my family still thought I was a Freemason, and I always ask students, "What do you think masonry is?" And the number one answer I get is driveways. They think we are the concrete industry. They think we're Freemasons. They think any number of different things, but they don't truly understand what masonry is. And so, Scott, I'll turn it over to you real quick, and then we can close up with Kyle and Steve about exactly what Amanda's talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I think the hands-on thing is very important to me, Amanda, because I think we can talk a lot about some of these things in vocational, but if they don't really touch it, I feel like they haven't had the experience. That's one comment I was going to make. But the other is I like to see us celebrate some of our success stories. We have a kid who worked here during the summers and every break there was and paid for his college in its entirety. And then he became industrial a construction. Basically, it was Ferris's version of a construction techno or a construction management degree, industrial engineering, and he graduated and then came on board with us. And that's a success story that I would like to see in front of people. I don't know how to promote this other than to get in front of, and if it's posters, if it's getting in front of counselors and maybe doing as contractors some community service work to get masonry in front, because I agree, Amanda, it's huge that kids do not know that it's an option. And it's especially worse when architects and engineers are going to college and not thinking of masonry as an option, especially when it's all the benefits of it being local, timely, and it's a career that typically pays well and can offshoot into several other options. But I think it's up to us to really get the promotion out there in front of all the people that make the difference. Let them know what masonry is. Bricklaying is an option. I mean, we still have to go to hospitals made of masonry. We have to have kids know about it so that they can even if they don't go through the construction technology, they're familiar with masonry and know of companies they can go to that they could get good employment. And then we as the contractors need to provide good employment. We can't run them through the ringer and beat them up and create an environment that's negative. We have to create more positive environments and be more responsible for what the environment is so that they can feel proud to come to work and want to create a career in masonry.
Absolutely. Kyle, what would you like to add?
I actually really don't think this is that hard of a sell. It's more just gotta be executed. So, like with the contractors, with the people in the community, with the young people all coming together, North Carolina again just put the formula out there on how they said they make a day of it with all the high schools coming to one area and having little competitions within side of that. I could tell you right now, like I've gone to this event we have called Construction Career Day, where I'll basically take one of the formulas for the skills things that they create and I'll start building it. You can get 20 kids bird watching you in 30 seconds going, hey, what's this? What's going on there? It's really not that hard. And by, like I said, putting it on Snapchat and Instagram and getting it out to them and letting them know that's how you're going to flip it. And then eventually I strongly feel that if you can just get one of these generations to kind of latch on and then they become now the contractors, the employees, and kind of pass it back down. I think once you get that to flip, the dominoes are just going to start falling from there. I really don't think this is that hard of a sell. It is a great career. I love it. There is a real sense of pride after you get done completing something. And yeah, I really feel strongly that is something that can take place, but it's just got to be a real big team effort from a lot of different people trying to do that.
Yeah, and I guess for any closing thoughts, I mean, Steve, do you have anything to add? And then we'll close out this episode.
Amanda mentioned, thinking outside of the box. And Kyle, maybe you already do this, but if we could do some articulation with the post high school institutions, then maybe we can connect with some of the people that Scott talked about, like especially the mothers. Okay, so my son or daughter is going to go into masonry in high school. They're going to do X, Y, and Z, and Y and Z counts as credit at the next educational level. So maybe if we can somehow tie into those institutions, maybe we'd get a little bit more support. And I'm just running that up the flagpole.
Absolutely. I think it's a collective effort, and I love hearing everything that's happening. And Phil and I talk, on a weekly basis of the efforts that we're doing as our associations and organizations. Thank you for being advocates for what we're doing. We'll always be your advocate in spreading the word and teaching these students. And it's not just student age, it's the younger adult. There's a whole fishbowl of workforce out there that we just need to bring awareness to. And I think the efforts of Michigan and the efforts of New York, I think we're on to something. And it's finishing out my comment of just staying relevant is really, really important, especially in 2022, where the attention span, they say, is 8 seconds you have to capture their interest. And that's where the hands-on comes in, because you walk into a classroom and you've got trowels and mortar and brick and block, and they're like, what's this? But thank you all so much. I think this is a conversation we can continue as the months go on, and we can touch base maybe while we're in the middle of the school year and just do like a part 2 of, you'll have the next group coming in. And, I know New York will be in the middle of doing their hands-on, and I'm sure Phil's going to have an agenda on his side. But thank you all so much for sitting here and discussing workforce development. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Masonry Principles. To continue the conversation, be sure to reach out to us by visiting masonryprinciples.com.